Hi, Sarah here. Welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the decks that I deem my cozy decks. I will admit, a lot of the things that people tend to describe as cozy or think of cozy, I didn't have too much experience with growing up. We didn't celebrate typical American holidays, like we didn't have turkey or pot roast growing up. We didn't really do things like huddle around the fire or gather on the couch and read a story or watch movies as a family together. We did have like hot chocolate, but it wasn't something that I remember drinking too much of or, again, making a big tradition out of growing up. I mentioned this to just describe how foreign the word cozy, the feeling of cozy, felt to me when I see this word, when I see other people describing the feeling of cozy. Even though I didn't have these things growing up as a child, I feel like there are some ways that I can embody or create coziness now as an adult. And I know this is a bit of a preamble to what is supposedly just a simple hashtag or a simple category of decks, but I just feel like this is important for me to define for myself so that I can explain what cozy feels like and how these decks might feel like they're cozy to me. I put together a list of traits or qualities that define coziness. So for me, coziness involves familiarity, there is predictability, there's a sense of safety, security, there's a sense of relaxation, we can feel free, and there's just a lack of pressure. So having this list of criteria just helps me define and decide what exactly is cozy, what makes a deck not cozy versus what makes a deck cozy, and why are these decks on the list. So here, I'll list a few decks that I consider my cozy decks. I'm also going to list three cozy activities that people can do with their tarot decks. So my first couple of picks for cozy tarot decks, the Way of the Panda and the Tarot Renard, and since they're both pretty similar, I'll talk about them at the same time. Both of these decks were painted with watercolor, and that really adds to the cozy vibes of these decks because it gives a very soft, very relaxing kind of feel. There's no harsh edges or harsh lines in these decks. They're just very softly drawn, and that just adds to the overall feeling of coziness. Compared to other decks that feature more angular artwork or with sharper or crisper lines, these decks just have very soft colors, very soft lines, even very soft shading. And because the main focus of these decks is animals, they have animals instead of humans in these decks, I feel like that also adds to the coziness because it's really easy to add a very fantasy, open-ended, open world kind of vibe to these characters. I feel like having humans in decks can add to a certain kind of politicalness or adding human struggles to a deck. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but I feel like because these decks feature animal characters instead of human characters, it just adds to a very relaxing feel. Animal characters tend to not have the baggage and the politicalness that human characters tend to carry when being depicted in a deck. And what I really love about the art here is that the watercolor illustrations, they reach almost the edges of the cards, but not quite. So there's still a lot of white space in these cards, so I feel like the art really has a chance to breathe. And because these decks were two of the first decks that I bought in my first year of learning tarot, there's a lot of familiarity. When I pull these cards out, when I pull this deck out to read with, I know that I'm just going to get very soft, very wonderful, comforting, cozy kind of messages. I'm not going to get very harsh messages, and I'm never really going to encounter any moments of confusion or any moments where I feel like the deck is like yelling at me because the art maybe comes off harsh. Because the art is very soft, the characters are very soft, there's a lot of love and warmth and comfort that just comes through in the art. And because I have this familiarity with the deck, with the images, because I've worked with the deck for so long and because I know the images so well, it just all adds to a very cozy vibe, a very cozy experience. Another cozy deck that also has animals, or at least creatures and no humans, is the Creatures Tarot. The creatures here are also just not harsh. Like, again, they're just a very inviting and comforting kind of vibe when I see these creatures out in a reading. These creatures aren't very angular. I feel like the roundness of these creatures adds to a general cozy vibe because they don't feel like scary, creepy, crawly creatures with a ton of angles or with a ton of claws or anything. It's just round, kind of snuggleable looking creatures, huggable looking creatures. And again, the watercolor vibe, the soft shading, it just adds to a very warm and cozy, relaxing, free kind of vibe with this deck. I used this deck in a Tarot Unpracticed video a while back where I just showed me on camera doing multiple readings with this deck and how the cards laid out on the table. And I just found this deck to be so cozy and comforting to read with. The minimalist kind of look with these cards, there's not a lot going on in each card. It feels like the message, the theme, the art of the card is very pared down. It's very simple to read with. And I feel like that simplicity definitely adds to the coziness. I feel like when there's too many details to look at, that can take away from the cozy vibe because then it feels very overstimulating. So this deck does not feel overstimulating. It feels just very gentle, very open, very calming to look at and to read with. Another cozy deck I've got is the Flow Tarot. This deck consists of photographs of water in just all different shapes and stages and sizes. A commonality between this Flow Tarot and the Creatures Tarot is that both decks are very simple, in my opinion. They have a very simple, straightforward message. So in this deck, the Flow Tarot, the simplicity, it comes from the single key word or the single key phrase on the card, and I feel like there's just only one core theme that comes through in each card. What's cozy and helpful about this deck is the simplicity and the straightforwardness. So because each card only has one core theme, it's easy to read each card just at face value, really. It's easy to draw a single card and get a really good message based off of each single card. But also, if you wanted to go deeper and think about all the different ways that this card could be read, all the different themes and messages this card could be sharing, I feel like there is room to go deeper and to think about these cards deeper. But at the same time, I don't always want to go deep in a tarot reading. Again, going back to my keywords, if I want to feel relaxed and I feel a lack of pressure, then maybe I don't want to have really deep tarot readings where I'm trying to think about 5 to 10 different meanings in a reading. And I really like how within these cards, there are some cards that might feature a lot of different little details and lines. Like there might be some cards that have a lot of trees or a lot of snow, but there are some cards that just feature sky. They just feature clouds. The clouds are some of my favorite cards in this deck because there is just so little detail that needs to be shown in these cards. You're just looking at big fluffy clouds. And yet it's still just very helpful to look at. So yeah, the simplicity, the straightforwardness of this deck just really adds to the cozy vibes in my opinion. Now, a few cozy decks that do have people in them. One of them is the Vivid Journey Tarot. Look, the purple matches the purple. So the people in this deck, there's not much diversity. Everyone is kind of white and just pale skinned, but I feel like this deck does give a lot of cozy vibes because the people are drawn so simply in this deck. There's not too much detailed or in-depth shading. The coloring in this deck is relatively simple, but I feel like the simplicity really adds to the coziness. Honestly, out of all the decks that I've had or that I've seen, this deck is the closest to what feels like a child-oriented deck for me because these drawings feel like what I might see in a children's book that I might want to pick up or own. So the scenes in this deck are just drawn very simply. There's not too much going on, and it just doesn't feel very overwhelming or overstimulating in that sense. The color palette of each card is very simple. There's only a few colors that are shown and highlighted on each card. There's a lot of curves in this card as well, so like the hair, the bodies, the clouds, there's just a lot of curvature in these illustrations. Not a lot of harsh angles, harsh lines, or harsh contrast of color. So again, all that visually just really adds to a cozy feeling deck. And again, because the deck itself, the scenes are very simple, they're not like super modernized or super reimagined Rider-Waite-Smith type of images. Because these are just familiar images, familiar depictions of these cards, it just adds to a cozy, predictable, familiar type of reading experience. One more cozy tarot deck with people in it is the Somnia Tarot. So similar to the previous deck, the limited color palette adds to the overall cozy vibe because it just adds, predictability in the colors. Like, I know I'm not going to be hit with really harsh colors or colors that are really contrasty and stand out against each other. And the fact that these colors are muted makes the deck really easy on the eyes. Familiarity is also a big part of why this deck is cozy for me because I've worked with this deck so much, especially for past life readings, but also just looked through these cards a lot. And that's why it feels cozy to me because I know most or all of the images here, like the back of my hand. Another cozy thing about this deck is that I feel like every card has a lot of information or a lot of imagery for me to just gaze into and almost meditate on. When I think of cozy, I think of reading a really good book by the fire, just allowing myself to relax and be free and, just escape to another world. Every time I read with this deck, I somehow find new details in the imagery that I just hadn't noticed before. And every single detail that I notice just adds more to the story, or it's just a cool tidbit about the card that I just hadn't seen before. Like, I might notice details about how the figures are positioned or how they're facing each other or not facing each other, the sky or the water level behind the figure, the brightness of the sky, especially comparing the cards to each other. For some reason, like this deck, beyond all other decks, I just notice so many details when I gaze into and meditate on these cards compared to other decks. And the lack of faces in this deck honestly really adds to the cozy vibe. It's like I can just project whatever I want onto these characters. Or the faces of these characters are not the focus of this deck either. It's the actions, the scenery of this deck. That's more the focus. So I feel like that just adds to the overall cozy vibe of this deck. The last cozy deck I've got is an Oracle deck. For this one, I've got the Reclaim Oracle. I feel like some people might be questioning why would you choose this one as a cozy deck when it's just all full of shadow work and there's all like sorts of ugly and negative and scary emotions and drawings and feelings in here. I feel like this is definitely a cozy deck, the coziest Oracle deck I've got, because kind of similar to the Somnia Tarot, there is a lot that I could just dive into and gaze into really when I just look at each card. This deck is really wonderful for slowing down and just gazing into each card, one card at a time, really thinking about what this card means, what the art here means, thinking about the past, present, future. It's just really easy to gaze into any one of these cards and get really existential and pondering about these cards. I don't think the cozy vibe of this deck specifically comes from doing readings and trying to get answers from this deck. I think the cozy vibes come from just gazing into any card and just trying to think about really anything. Maybe not even thinking, just letting your mind wander and think about whatever comes to mind, just using these cards as like, I guess, prompts for exploration instead of trying to come up with any concrete, definite answer. And yeah, some of these cards might be kind of heavy. They might be kind of triggering. They might come at a weird time. But I feel like it's just a nice time for us to neutrally sit with ourselves and reflect on anything that might come up in these cards. I feel like that's what we do when we sit next to a fireplace, right? Like when I go camping and I'm sitting around a fire with friends, sometimes we can't help but reflect on how we've been, how we got to this point, what we might want to do in the future. Just having a quiet moment together helps us regroup and get ready for the future. So I feel like that's what this deck does, and that's where the coziness vibe of this deck comes from. Just sitting with this deck and regrouping before we move on and try to do something or get more answers. So that's my list of cozy decks. Now I want to share 3 cozy tarot deck activities that you can do. You can do these cozy activities when you feel like you just need a reset, or when you want to do something with your tarot deck that's maybe a little bit more slow and steady, a bit more meditative, a bit more easygoing, instead of trying to do hard-hitting readings, in-depth readings, and explorations with your deck. Cozy activity number 1 is you can reset the deck, basically putting the cards back in order. But here's a twist. Instead of looking at the words on the bottom, try to look at just the imagery and gaze at the imagery. What does it mean? What does it feel like as you use that to put your deck back in order? I mean, of course, you can't help but glance at the card. The words are right there. But still, if you can try to just sort the cards, looking at the imagery, instead of relying on only the words, I feel like that's a very cozy activity. The act of resetting a deck, just taking the time to look at every image, just being like, wow, that's what the card looks like. That card exists. This is a cool card. This is really cool art. And just going through the deck that way, sorting the cards that way, it's very meditative, and it's just nice to spend those few extra minutes just bonding with our deck instead of being in a rush to just read the words, get the deck in order immediately, and move on to the next activity. And if you want, you can also take the time to put the deck in a different order than what you might normally put it in. So for me, I typically do the majors, then the wands, cups, swords, and pentacles. But I could change it up. I could do maybe the majors last. Then I could do pentacles and wands and swords and cups. Or maybe I want to sort the cards by number instead of by suit. So instead of wands, cups, swords, pentacles, I can do the aces first, then the 2s, then the 3s, up to the 10s, and then the pages and the kings. So resetting your deck, it could be a habitual thing where you put the suits in your typical order, but you could also change it up. Just change up the sorting of your deck. However you decide to do it, I'm sure it's going to be a very cozy, meditative activity. Cozy activity number 2 is sorting the cards into families. Similar to the last activity where you're just trying to look at the cards and not the words on the cards, here we're going to just sort the cards by any family, any category that you feel like you want to. So maybe you want to sort these cards by rainbow, like which cards are prominently red, which are prominently orange, which are prominently yellow, etc., etc. Or maybe you sort by how many figures are in each card, which cards feature 1 person or 2, or 0 people? Which cards feature people in the top half? Which cards feature people far away versus in front? Which cards feature a night sky versus a sunny sky? Which cards feature water and which cards don't feature water? You could also sort by vibe, so like which cards feel happy and positive, scary and negative, gray area. There's a lot of ways that you could try sorting these cards because it just gets you looking at your cards, just gazing at them. And, you don't have to go too deep into the vibes of these cards. Part of the cozy feeling, like my keywords say, is just you're relaxing and there's a lack of pressure. This is a fun exercise, a fun way to look at the cards and just, for fun, put them in different categories in different families. And the third cozy activity is to compare 2 decks at once. See what similarities, what differences do they have. And even if you don't have 2 physical decks, you can still compare against digital decks, images of tarot cards that you see online. Again, similar theme in that here you're just looking at each image, you're just gazing into them, letting your mind wander and observe the imagery at a slow pace. You might choose 2 decks that are very similar in aesthetic, or you might choose 2 decks that are very different. Maybe they still have some similarities that you can notice. You could even try comparing cards with oracle decks. You can do an oracle deck and a tarot deck, or 2 different oracle decks. Compare the cards again. See which cards feel similar, which ones feel different. It's another way of categorizing the cards, and again, just feeling whichever ones feel similar, just allowing your eyes to wander over the imagery and observe any differences or similarities. It's just meant to be a fun, cozy activity that just gets you looking at your decks and just observing the imagery. So those are my picks for cozy decks and a few cozy tarot activities that I came up with. Thanks to Nightshade Tarot for making this tag, and I really don't have much else to say for this outro, so I'm gonna just close out here. That's all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Bye!